Okay, are we ready to paint today? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Markowsky, and welcome to my studio. Today we are going to recreate another painting by another one of my favorite artists today. Today we are going to be looking at the art of Andriy Kotska, and this is an artist that I think is fantastic, probably not very well known at all here in North America, where I'm streaming to you live from, but in Ukraine, where he's originally from, and where he lived and later passed away in the late 1980s, he is seen as one of the great artists of Ukrainian heritage. So it's particularly, again, with all the things going on in the world today, it's nice to take a little bit of a moment to acknowledge the great artists who helped establish Ukrainian culture, independent Ukraine. Yes, contrary to the belief of some world leaders, there is such thing as Ukraine. So we're going to be painting this picture here of a Hutsulka dancer, and that is a type of dance. I think often when people think of Ukrainian dancing, they're thinking of Hutsulka dancing. And so this is, the traditional Ukrainian dress. And my sister and I used to dance in very similar kinds of clothing here. And if I find the photos, I'll show you in a little bit here as we get going. So anyway, let's look at what we're gonna do today. The plan of attack. So we're going to start by getting the image onto the canvas. I'll show you how to do that. There's a Dropbox folder with some images in here which you can transfer, and I'll show you how to do that. Then we're going to stain the canvas. That's what the Imprimatura is. And then we'll take a look at the biography of Kotska, and then we'll maybe do a little bit of underpainting. Now, we're going to be painting a portrait today, and this is as part of our Master Study series. This is, I think, the first portrait that we're doing for our beginner painters. So that's why I've chosen today's painting. It's, despite the way it might look, it is one of the more simple portraits that we can do. And so we're going to work on that. Then we'll start with our background. We're going to do the background and then the foreground. And then if we need to do any more background, we'll go back there, finish it, and then we'll finish the foreground, and then then we'll do our side-by-side comparison probably in about 2.5 hours from now. All right, we'll try to keep things on the simpler, speedier end for our beginner painters. And then if you want to support the channel, if you're new to the channel, subscribe, hit the notification bell. I am going to do another painting by this same artist, maybe later tonight, maybe tomorrow morning. I'm not sure exactly when. So if you want to know when, hit that notification bell so you can find out when those kind of spontaneous episodes happen. And then if you want to leave a donation to help keep this whole train running, that would very much appreciate that. As little as $1 through PayPal, or you can contact me through the Facebook group or my website, etc. Okay, so let's talk about how to get an image onto the canvas. Now, we could just sketch this thing out, and many people do that, but for beginners particularly, or even more advanced artists, because even the greatest artists of all time, quote-unquote, cheated, right? And people will always, everyone's got an opinion about this, but any artist who you've heard of, if you've heard their name before, they would have used any sort of technique possible to help speed up the artistic process, to get an image onto the canvas and move forward, right? So some people will call it cheating. If your doctor uses anesthesia before they do an operation on you, are they cheating? Are you taking the easy way out? Is it cheating when your dentist does x-rays to see if you have a cavity, or should they just use their magical genius wisdom to decide? Anyway, So here I'm going to play a video that's going to show you how I did the tracing process, and I'm going to play it and talk over top of it while that happens here. So here is, I'm going to be painting on a 9x12 sized canvas board, and I've got my outline. Oh, I forgot to show you where that is. I'll show you that right after I finish playing this. So the outline, which I've printed off on my inkjet printer at home, and then I'm just going to tape it down. You see I actually moved it a little bit further down so that there might be a little bit more room at the top. That way I don't have to improvise so much, because you know the paper's an 8.5x11 sheet of paper on a 9x12 size board, so there's a little bit of extra room. So, and then I'm using some carbon transfer paper. You can use, or I think that was it carbon or charcoal? Either way, any kind of transfer paper will do the trick, and usually it's carbon or graphite. And this was actually two-sided, so you don't have to be so worried about which side is upside or down, although usually it's the shiny side that you want down. And then I'm just going to go around on all these lines. And then I always just sort of double check before I peel off the paper to make sure I've got everything there. So that's sort of maybe what I'm doing right here. Looks like I forgot some features. Boom. Oh, look what I missed. That little line there. That's why, again, I think that's good enough, right? So once we've got that, that's what it's going to look like. As I said, I want to do this painting too, another painting of his that I love, and I've already done the outline for that. You can see it leaves a reverse impression when you use the double-sided. So I'm going to leave this for now, and over the next 48 hours I'm going to try to do that one. So I'm not going to try to do it in today's episode, because I always learn it's always a bad idea. Okay, so let me show you where I got that outline from. So there's a link to a Dropbox folder in the description below. At the very top, you're going to see some of the most, this is our introductory episodes where we just sort of talk about the basics of mixing color. And then down the next ones here that have letters, that are lettered, these are our most simple paintings. And if you see in here, there's the 6 files, there's the the paintings themselves, and then my outlines that are provided to you free of charge are in JPEG and PDF format, whatever is easier for you to use. And I thought I would just also mention, if you scroll even further down here, there is 150 more folders of all sorts of very, very famous artists: Edvard Munch, Gauguin, Picasso, Monet, Sonia Delaunay, Kandinsky, Jacques-Louis David, Rene Magritte, Turner, Basquiat, oh my goodness, Yu Peng, Anish Kapoor, Edward Hopper, Walt Disney, and so on and so forth. So if you like what you're seeing today, certainly check out more paintings, as well as encourage you to join the private Facebook group just for people like yourself. And I encourage you to take a photograph of the painting you made and upload it to the group so that we can celebrate your achievement. You can get some feedback by some of the other artists that are already have joined this group that grew spontaneously through these courses. As well as once a month, I go through all of the images that are there, organize them, and we do a celebration episode and take a look at all the great art and all the different versions people did of the same painting. So I see people talking about the Dropbox folder. The Dropbox folder has the files in them. I just put them in there about 10 minutes ago, so I apologize for the delay. Okay, so the next thing, after we've got our image on the canvas, let's talk now about the Imprimatura. It's an Italian word for the first layer of paint, or the first paint. And really what we do is we're going to stain the canvas, and I'm going to use a particular color. I'm going to use my warm yellow. And if you're watching me for the first time, you're like, what is warm yellow? What are you talking about? Well, the paint that I'm going to use is this brand of paint called Amsterdam. I'm not sponsored by them. I'm not paid by them. They haven't given me any free stuff. I just like them. I've been using them when I teach for the past decade because it's a student grade paint, so it's definitely much cheaper. This kind of tube of paint, I just bought some new ones. I think it was $14 here in Vancouver, Canada, and this is 250 milliliters. So for instance, this is another brand of paint. This is golden, and this is cadmium yellow dark, and this is the same color I would use for my warm color that I'm about to use in a second, and I think this is about $24. So it's almost twice the price for how much paint is in here. Probably under the fold. 148 milliliters. So literally half. So just about half as much for twice as much than this, right? And I think most people will not notice any difference whatsoever. And golden is, you do pay for higher quality, but I would say it's maybe 10% better in quality for a lot more money. Liquitex, this is their student grade brand. They also make a higher, more professional grade of paint. Winsor & Newton, again, all of this we've covered before in our intro painting course, but for those of you that are new to the channel, just kind of quickly going through here so that people have an idea of what paints you could use instead. Now, I do recommend that you use some combination of these paints to get the results that we have. Okay, so let's take this paint, my warm yellow, and I'm going to apply it a little bit here onto a palette. And then I'm going to take some water. This is the only time I ever use water. And you can use as much water as you want in your paints, but then you're not really using acrylic paint, quote unquote, properly, which is, I kind of cringe saying that, because who's to say how to use any art material properly, but it's really just not as it's intended, which is, I think, usually when I teach these classes in person, I've literally pulled people, and almost everyone in the class will say that you should be dipping your paintbrush in water all the time. So it's probably the biggest myth that exists with acrylic paint, is the constant use of water, putting water on your brush to get it more fluid. You can mist your paints to maybe keep them a little bit wet with like a spray bottle. But the more just think about what you use water for at the end of your painting session, to clean your brushes, right? So if you're water will dilute the paint, and it will break down the bonds of the pigment and make it stick less and less to the surface. So one of the reasons why I use water in this application at the very beginning of a painting is because it will help speed up the drying time. But also we've got gesso on here, and gesso is basically like a plaster. It's like acrylic paint that's got plaster powder in it, and plaster will absorb water and this pigment very, very well. So this is a case where it's not such an issue mixing water into the paint, because the surface that we're applying it to will suck that up. So literally what we're doing is staining the surface more so than really even painting the surface. Okay, and now that I've got that established, I'm going to let this sit and dry. Now, most of the time throughout art history, artists would not paint this warm yellow as I've done. This is a bit of this is something pretty exclusive to the way that I paint. It's and it's come out of years of, usually what I started doing is I would mix the more traditional kind of rusty red brownish color, which is what most artists do with the Imprimatura. But as part of our beginner courses, I started just painting the warm yellow like this in order to get the painting started, and I started realizing I really liked the results. I kind of really liked the Kodachrome glowing yellow color that we see, and I thought, you know what, it goes really fast because we just apply that paint right on there. We're not having to mix a brown, assuming you don't go and buy a tube of brown paint, which you could do, but we can mix one here with the colors we're about to use. So everything's got a reason, if you're wondering. Okay, so there's my palette. We're going to put some color on here after we talk about the artist biography. I just thought one of the things, since we're talking about a Ukrainian artist, one of the greatest authors in Ukrainian history is Nikolai Gogol, and not Google, but Gogol. And this is a great translation. The Pervier and Volkanovsky translations. They're most famous for having translated Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and a bunch of other Russian authors. Gogol also wrote in Russian. He's Ukrainian, but he wrote in Ukrainian and Russian. But I just, over the past day, while our daughter and I were going for our walk, I was reading a great story of his called The Portrait, which is awesome. Great story. And it's hard to believe this was written in like the early 1800s. And it's a creepy, weird story of this guy, this artist who buys this portrait with the last little bit of money he has and goes home and puts it on his wall, and the landlord's knocking at the door, wants to kick him out because he's not paying rent. And at night, the portrait comes alive and gives him money. Gives him more than enough money for him to survive. And he starts spending that money and living the high life, and he starts getting commissions by some of the wealthiest people in town, and that's as far as I've gotten. There's another 20 pages left, but after having read many of the other stories that Gogol has written, I get a feeling it's not going to turn out well. Because basically Gogol is like the Edgar Allan Poe of Ukrainian literature, or Russians like to think of Gogol as a Russian author, but it's basically one of the things I was thinking about with Gogol is that he reminds me a lot of like Twilight Zone. Like a lot of his episodes, or a lot of his short stories, of which he's primarily a short story author, are a lot like Twilight Zone episodes. So you're just like, uh-oh, this guy, this poor artist should not have spent that money that the person inside the painting just gave him, because you just know that money is probably belongs to some dead relative or somebody who's going to come and get him. So I was going to squeeze out all this paint after I had done and talked about, but I got into talking about Gogol, so I just figured I would just ramble on and do something productive while that was happening. So thank you for indulging me. Let's go to... Okay, so let's talk about today's artist. There's not a lot of information available in English about this artist, so I did a bunch of Google translations from Ukrainian and Russian. So we'll see if someone speaks Ukrainian or Russian, maybe you have a different interpretation of events than I have here. So this is what the Wikipedia page looks like in Ukraine. And unless you can read Ukrainian, it doesn't make much sense. But so I'll talk about his life story while we maybe look at some of his images here. This is the museum dedicated to his work in Ukraine. This is his grave site, and here's the Wikipedia page. I'm not sure the difference. There's, I think, 2 Russian. I'm not sure what the difference between these two Wikipedias are again. Let's see. Actually, since I was just talking about that museum, we can just sort of. So the museum that houses his work in Ukraine was his old house where he used to live towards the end of his life. And if we just look at, let's zoom out. That's a place where he taught, and we'll come back to that shortly. So if we just zoom out on the map of Eastern Europe here, we have, here's, Germany and England, Poland, here's Ukraine, and the majority of the fighting now that the Russians have invaded is right around this area and close to Odessa down here. But today's artist is from this area, Uzhhorod, and you can see this city is literally right on the border with Slovakia. And I'm not exactly sure where he was born, but this is the house that you can go. Well, I'm not sure if it's open. Maybe is it still up and running? Looks like it could be. There is a war going on right now, so you'd be forgiven if you were to show up there to go visit if they weren't open. Or they would be forgiven for not having the door open. But I just thought, just as we just sort of mentioned here, a few images of the interior of his home. And it looks like one of the paintings he was working on when he died. So there was a fresh painting on the easel when he passed away, which is not surprising. One of my favorite things to do is travel around and to go visit the homes and studios of famous artists, whether it be Matisse or Renoir, Cézanne, Van Gogh, and Emily Carr, Frida Kahlo. Wherever I go, I usually try to convince my wife to spend half a day going to one of these museums, because usually they're preserved as a museum. And so this, and often most artists work all the way up until they're in their until they're in the grave, because a lot of people, when they get older, they really enjoy painting, and if you're an artist, why would you stop? So anyway, let's take a look at some images of his work here. Let's get bigger. So when he was born into a family that had 8. I'm not sure what order of the 8 children that his parents had, but he had 7 brothers and sisters, and his father was a coachman, which is a coach driver, a horse-drawn coach driver, basically like a taxi driver would be today. Although back in the day, you'd generally had to you'd be fairly wealthy to be able to own your own carriage or to rent one. So in a way, it would be more like being a limousine driver today than a taxi driver. And so we can see that, and I wasn't able to find too much information about Kotska's youth. He did, when he was 16 years old, start attending a Christian teachers seminary to learn to become a public school teacher, which after graduation, he spent basically the next 20 years teaching in public schools, not only in Western Ukraine, but in Poland, Romania, Belarus. I'm trying to think if he was in Hungary as well. But he traveled all over the place, which is, if you're some people out there who are teachers or nurses, doctors, know what that's like, is you sort of get sent to wherever, usually smaller cities, villages, to get some experience or as part of your practicum, and he was no different. But one of the things that he did is he started painting, because when he was in school, one of his teachers at the at the seminary was also a fairly well-known artist who he studied under and was his mentor. And from that, he really kind of got into painting and drawing. So in his free time, he would be painting some of the local people that he met, some of the peasants who were working in the fields, and some of his students, the parents of some of his students, etc. So you could see that one of the things he's most famous for are his portraits. And so he did a lot of commissioned portraits. As soon as people saw some of these, they really liked them. But he also did a lot of landscapes, and we don't see many of them online. I'm sure probably if I spoke Ukrainian and I was able to translate some, I'd probably find some of these a little bit easier. And I also, like, for instance, the spelling of his name is spelt, I think I found 8 different spellings for his name, which is not unusual, because Ukrainian and Russian are different languages that share similar roots but often have slightly different spellings, especially for names. And not only did he again live in Ukraine and parts of Russia later on, but he lived in Budapest and Hungary, and, as I said, Belarus and Poland and Romania. So probably they also had, slightly different spellings of his name throughout. So, and where he established, because he would live in a certain place for 4 or 5 years and make paintings and sell paintings. So it's interesting that his name is slightly spelt differently in different languages. So, but I just love the way that he paints. Like, I'm trying to think of other artists that he reminds me of, like at this particular time that he's working. So these are all happening in the about 1940s, late 1930s, early 40s to 60s or so. So I would say most of these paintings are. And I'm trying to think of, and so I think it was in 1942, I think, he had a small exhibition in Budapest, and from there he won a scholarship to the Art Academy in Budapest. And so that is where he finally began his official training as an artist, because up until that point he was essentially self-taught, although he did have a brief exposure to that other artist, Erdely, when he was in the seminary. But I love these paintings. Let's see if we could see a few more of these. Again, he tends to dress everyone in these traditional Ukrainian clothing, probably based on memories. Either he brought those clothes, or there's quite the diaspora of Ukrainians who kind of spread throughout, not just Eastern Europe and Western Europe, but obviously here in North America. My heritage is Ukrainian, and just like a few of the other artists that we've talked about, who, despite having left Ukraine many years prior, really spent the majority of the remainder of their lives making art about that. David Berluk, who's painting, we did remember this one we did a couple weeks ago when we mixed sand into the paint, right? So he basically, for the remainder of his life, made even though for about the last 40 years of his life he lived in New York City, most of his paintings were about his youth and childhood in Ukraine. So, which is, I guess it's not that unusual. A lot of artists, as they get older, become kind of nostalgic for their youth and think about dreams and stuff. Oh, look, that looks familiar. I should have thought about this more, whose art this reminds me of. There is an aspect during the 1940s late 1940s, under communism there was an increase under Stalin. Essentially, there was an increasing pressure on artists and authors, musicians, to conform to a particular style of art and music and writing. In terms of painting, the style was social realism, and social realism is socialist realism. Socialist realism is a kind of a style of art that we don't see much of today, except from China, because China and North Korea are really the two main places where we still see this social realist art being created. It essentially is these like a propaganda art that celebrates the achievements of the Communist Party and the very idealized portraits of people working in fields, etc. And so for a long time, throughout like the 40s, 50s, that was something that Kotska also did. And I think, just based on a little bit of the research I was able to find, that was a pretty depressing period for him, and which is kind of surprising, because if you see these, you're like, oh, these just look like portraits of Ukrainian people. What would be the big deal? Well, if you know anything about history, the Russian Soviets who basically ran Ukraine for 100 years were doing everything in their power to suppress any form of independent Ukrainian expression or independent Ukrainian culture, right? Exactly what Putin is saying today, that there's no such thing as Ukraine or Ukrainians. It's an invention by Lenin, which is hilarious because Ukraine existed for 1,000 years before Russia. But anyway, so this type of paintings of Ukrainians dressed in traditional Ukrainian clothing is kind of highly provocative, right? So it's always funny. You see things like this and like, oh, like kind of simple paintings, but this is the kind of stuff that could get people sent away to Siberia for 20 years. Okay, lots of comments here. So let's move on to the painting itself. So now that we've got the underdrawing transferred onto this canvas, and now that we've applied our Imprimatura, we are ready to paint. This still looks a little bit wet. I might just hit this with the blow dryer here in a second, but maybe while I'm going to start mixing a little bit of color, and then maybe that'll be dry by that time. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is, for my underpainting, is to make usually a pretty dark color, because I want this color to come through, through a subsequent layer that I'm going to put over top. And if I just paint, like I'm going to paint a skin tone right over top of all of this, and by doing that, I'm going to cover up many of these facial features. And if I don't do some type of painting here, I'm going to lose all those features. Now, I'm going to show you a technique to paint faces that is about this most simple way that we can do this possible. There are other ways where we might just go right in and start painting different colors and shapes, or color shapes, on this face. That's a little bit more advanced. So again, being this is our first, we did a Matisse painting of his daughter Marguerite, but that was very simple, right? So now we're moving up the ladder a little bit, challenging ourselves. So what I want to do to get this darker color is I'm going to take my cool blue, right? So that's like a cerulean blue. I really like that cool blue. Now I'm going to take my warm red, And you can see how I like to put them side by side, and I kind of mix them together here. That way, if I need more of one color, I can just drag a little bit more in. And this color right here is like a really kind of dark purple. It's a muted purple because we're mixing two colors across the color wheel from one another. So they almost crisscross through the neutral core, which means that they're not going to be as intense as if I mixed a purple using my cool red and my warm blue. Again, if you did all the exercises in those first few classes, you're like, oh yeah, obviously. But, you know, if you're watching this episode for the very first time and you haven't seen some of the previous episodes, I understand. Now, right now this is a purple. If I want to turn this into a gray, or into a really, basically a black, I'm going to take some of this cool yellow and mix this into here. And what that does is it just pulls this color, which is sort of exists right here, into the center where our neutral core is, right? Where this color is going to be basically has almost no chroma. It's just about as neutral of a color as you can get. So right now that's got a bit of, it's maybe hard to see, it's a bit more on the brown side. So if we take a bit more blue and pull more blue into here, there we go. There we go. Now it's becoming much more neutral. So when you're seeing that color, and if it looks kind of brown, that just tells me I got a lot of yellow and a lot of red, and I need to add more blue. If it looked really green, well, that tells me I got a lot of yellow and blue. I need more red. Okay, so we can use this same color later on to darken other colors that we make, because basically what we have here is like a black. Not quite. If we want, you know that I rarely ever use black, but if I wanted to use black, and I don't think we're going to need it for this painting, then I would just use that at the very, very end, and usually only in the foreground itself. Otherwise, if you put it in the background, it's going to go, it's going to pull that background forward. So now what I'm going to do is take this color and a small brush, and then I'm just going to do a little bit of detailing. I'm going to go around some of the eyes and such. Let's just put these side by side here. It may even be worthwhile just looking at this. So you can see I've made some creative choices as to how to draw this face, and if everyone did their own outlining, people would have a different version, but this is what works for me. So I'm just gonna now go in, do a few things here so that I don't lose these facial features. So the point is we are going to paint over all of these lines, right? So don't worry about making them perfect. You don't want them to be too sloppy, but don't worry about making them absolutely perfect lines. I like to just kind of go pretty quickly. And this is also, I really strongly believe in this as an opportunity just to kind of loosen up, right? Like I always, you know, when I talk to people about painting and drawing, I always say the first 20 minutes or so of your painting should just be warm-ups, right? And just like a ballet dancer doesn't just run out onto the stage on a Friday night, you know, the curtains come up and they've just gotten out of a taxi cab and they're right on the stage. No, they're going to do some stretching. They're going to, maybe if they've probably been there for a few hours, maybe they've done a practice, a rehearsal. Same sort of thing for an artist, right? that's, I mean, most people, if you talk to them, they'll say kind of, you know, I didn't, you know, it's about an hour, once about an hour into the painting is where I've really felt like I was into the groove. Think about, like, if any of you like to go jogging or running, you know, it's like that first 10 minutes are so tough, and then after like 30-40 minutes you're kind of into the groove and you're like, I could do this for a little while longer. I'm into my pace and all that kind of stuff. Okay, now there are other details here, but I don't know if I really, these ones are much more, I'm going to put solid colors in all these places, so I don't think I really need any more lines there. I think that feels like I've got everything that I need. So let's move on. Okay, what's our next step? Okay, so now that we've got our underpainting established, we did just a little bit on the face, just to kind of help preserve those details. We'll let that dry while we work on the background of today's painting. Now, one of the reasons why I chose this painting, this was also on the cover of a book on Ukrainian art, so it's been reproduced many times. It's one of the easier images for people to find, and besides, I just love it. I think it's a really cool painting. But it also has a very simple background, and it is to try as much as possible to find as simple of paintings as possible for our beginner painters. So let's just take a quick look at this painting and just see, you know, how we might want to proceed. If you look in the background here, do you see this color up here? That's the Imprimatura, right? That's the first color. That is basically the yellow that I applied to get the painting started. In this case, though, he's used the more traditional rusty red, the brownish color. So that's what he's got in the background, and then he painted this cool blue, just like we have, on top of it. So if you were, you know, trying to do this as faithfully as possible, instead of putting this warm yellow down, we could have mixed a brown, painted that there, and then painted the cool blue. So I'm going to actually make a brown that I'm going to paint over top of my background here, and then I'm going to paint the blue. So it is adding a little bit of an extra step, but you know, we could just go right into the cool blue, which, you know what, maybe we should just do that. Maybe we should just, if you wanted, however, just maybe, so yeah, I think I'm just going to go right to the cool blue. But if you wanted, one thing you could do is you could paint like a cool brown in the background and then put the blue over top of it. I think for our sake, we're going to do this in a way that most people won't notice the difference, except maybe in the corner. Do we want to leave any brown there? Or any yellow? That yellow might look a little bit funny if we leave it, but let's, I'm just thinking out loud here. Let's just go right into the cool blue. So, the way that I want to do this is, let's take our cool blue. Actually, we don't need that much, so I'm just going to put some here. Let's take some white. Bit more, and then I'm going to take some of my matte medium, and matte medium is basically paint that has no color, no pigment in it, and so it's clear. It's going to dry 100% clear, maybe 99.5% clear. So I'm going to put this on here. That way I'm going to still see a little bit of my background coming through, that little bit of that yellow, which I like. If we just painted this with the white and the blue, we would obliterate the background, that yellow, entirely, which some people are like, isn't that what we want to do? Well, maybe, depending on the kind of painting you make. I kind of like the backgrounds, so I kind of like leaving that as much as possible, at least a hint of it. So I've mixed that in here, and then I'm just going to paint right over here. I forgot I was going to blow dry this, so we may see a bit of this yellow mix onto my paint here. It looks like it's okay so far. Now it is a little bit patchy, and that's okay, because I'm going to do it maybe a second layer here. Maybe. Yeah, I'm going to do a second layer. Maybe not everywhere, though. Because if we look at these side by side, you can see we're not too far off, right? And we just skipped right over that brown. So I might just now let this dry. Should I try to... Maybe I'm going to scrape a little bit of paint off in that corner. Make it a little bit thinner over there. That's good enough. Okay, so I'm going to blow dry this, and then I'm just going to mix a little bit more of this paint and paint that again. Okay, so I'm just going to blow dry this briefly. Mute the microphone. Oh. Okay. Oh, okay. The audio came back on. The software seems to crash and then start up. It looks like it didn't. Usually it starts up muted, but you never know when. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit darker than what I just put on there. So we'll see if this is too dark of a color. One thing I could do is just add more and more matte medium, and that's going to make it more transparent. Let's see. Let's see if this is actually not bad. I might want to do just a little bit more of a patchy kind of thing. Because I like how it looks in his painting here. And then I might do this again with just adding a little bit more white. So let's take this same color. I'm going to put it over here, and let's add more white to this mixture. Okay. It's not the same. Obviously, it would be different if we had a darker background. So if anything, like my background being a little bit yellow is a little bit lighter. But I don't know. I think we'll see. As it's. I always tell people it's very hard to judge your background at this stage, and that's why I like to do the background, go to the foreground, work on the foreground for a little while, and then come back to the background once we get more or any color into the foreground, because otherwise there's no point in like obsessing over the perfection of your background when so much of this is unfinished, or even with this bright, brilliant, warm yellow glowing from here, because it really affects how we see these colors, right? This color no longer exists independently on its own. It is now influenced by the colors around it. Like that's painting, basically. Okay, so we'll move on. Now that we've got some color in the background, maybe not exactly perfect, but we never know. We never know. We're going to move on now to the foreground. We're going to paint a little bit of the figure, and then we'll decide once we've got all that color in, if we do indeed need to go to the background, or if that's done enough to our satisfaction. So let's look at the original again and just think about how we want to approach this. Now, there's no right or wrong way to decide what your next step could be. I think I'm going to go right directly to the face and get that started, because often people, especially beginners, when I've taught classes and we leave the face to the very end, you can feel the anxiety. People are like, well, everything's going really nice, but what if I've put all this effort in and we get to the face and I screw the face up, and then it's a big waste of time? And I'd much rather screw the face up in the first 20 minutes and then I don't have to waste another hour, which I can totally understand that feeling. Having said that, let's think a little bit more positively. We are going to do this painting well. We're going to do a great job. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to look for what's called the local color. And the local color is usually the color before it's like, so if we think of the local color of this mug, the local color of this mug would be maybe a little bit of a grayish white. It's intended to be white, but so it would be kind of not the white of the highlights, nor the white of the shadows. You can see my hand is casting a shadow on it. It would be basically white. The local color of an apple might be red. The local color of this hat, which I just created, and if you're interested in getting this hat, and all donations are going to go to Ukraine, there's going to be a link in the description below when I figure out how to do that. But I just made that, so if you're interested, you can buy that. Anyway, that local color would be blue, right? So the local color here, I can see a little bit of coming through. Now, this is probably partly the Imprimatura that he applied to start. And you can see a little bit of the Imprimatura on the sides here, and even coming through in a few other places. But essentially, for our purpose, we're going to now mix a skin tone. And it's going to be mostly kind of, probably even a little bit lighter. Might even be... It's going to be one of these colors up here, probably. A little bit like the color on the nose. Okay, after I have a sip. So, let's now... What we want to do is mix a Caucasian skin tone, which is a little bit like... It's basically a warm brown with some or like an orangey peachy brown with some more white in it, right? So to mix that color, let's take our warm yellow And let's make it right over here. Because it's going to be mostly warm yellow. Or it's actually probably mostly white, but anyway. Mostly warm yellow. We're going to have some warm red and some warm blue. So those are our three colors that we need to create this, right? So I'm going to then, I can take these colors, basically very little blue is necessary. So I'm going to actually take some of that off my brush and take some red. Let's mix this red into here. The colors change. Just a little much red. Let's take a bit more yellow. It's very hard to lighten a color. Once it gets kind of dark, it's easier just to mix it again. So that's okay. Put a little bit of blue in here. That little bit of blue, what it's going to do is take this color from an orange and pull it towards the neutral quarter and make it a bit more brown. Right? So it just sort of, again, it takes some of the saturation from that color away. And we barely need any of it. Like, so we had maybe 70% warm yellow, 20%, 25% warm red, and 5% or less blue, right? Just need a little bit of it. If you put too much in there, it's going to go kind of green, which is not necessarily a bad thing. There's often, when we're painting portraits, where we actually want green in the face. It might sound kind of strange, but a face has all sorts of colors in it. Okay, so we add some white to it. Now let's just take a look at the original and just see where we're at. Okay, so right now, again, the color we're looking at is up in here. So let's take a little bit more red and give it just a bit more warmth. Again, you can see it just put a little bit in there. And that's right, it might be hard to tell, but that's pretty close, because what we're going to do next, actually maybe just a little bit more red. We don't want to go too much, because we're actually going to add more red to this later on when it comes to the middle point of the face, right? So that's good. What we're going to do is we're going to add, again, we could do, yeah, we're going to use matte medium for this. And I'm just going to mix this in here. That's going to thin that paint out, let a little bit of that yellow come back through. Let's put a bit more red in here. Okay. And also, don't worry, because again, this is our first layer, and if for some of you, if this is the first time you've ever painted a face, there's always going to be more opportunities, right? Oops, where did that color come from? Okay. Now I'm just going to go right over top of everything. There's going to be some hair right there. In fact, I'm going to go to a bigger brush. So even though there's hair, I'm painting right over top of that hair so that because sometimes, you know, there's skin underneath our hair, in case anybody didn't realize. You can always go check in the mirror right now if you doubt that there's hair underneath your, or there's skin under your hair. And if you get it a little bit not in quite all the right places, that's okay. Okay, so that's our first layer. Right, it looks a little different on camera. That's weird. But I'm pretty confident that that's where I want to be. Okay. So maybe while this is drying, I'm just gonna, I like to kind of scrape any extra paint off here. That way I might be able to use it later on for touch-ups or anything, right? Pascal says, Byzantine style of portraits use lots of green as a base, apparently. Yeah, there's definitely, there's whole techniques of portrait painting that actually start with a blue or green base and then paint warmer colors over top of that. And the idea is that, according to that sort of process, is that you kind of underneath the skin, you've got all these muscles, and they're going to be dark, and you've got, blood that has, what is it? It's not, what is the opposite of oxygenated? Is blood that's on it that's full of impurities and CO2 on its way back towards the lungs and the heart. And that blood is bluish, right? And so the idea is that you're painting kind of the darker area, and then you put the kind of the brighter, warmer stuff on top of that. So that's definitely, yeah, you're right. There's many artists, a lot of artists in 1800s used that type of a process. Okay. So, how about, what if, I was going to say let's paint the red, but maybe just want to stay away from that face for a while, let that dry. Let's do the clothing down here, I think. Let's get some of this white in place. So, that white it's got a bit of a gray, so let's take some of this white. You see, it got a little bit of blue on it. I'm not so concerned about that because I might do other things to it afterwards. I'm going to put a little bit of my darker color in. You can see how when I add that to the white, hey, it goes gray. So that's exactly what happens when we mix that color and we add some white to it. Now that's a little bit too much gray, but it's just kind of fun just to see how that works. Let's put this white here. And some matte medium again. This is darker than I was hoping, but because I was painting that gray as a demonstration, but hey, we could still use it. There's nothing wrong with that, so this will just, if we paint this down here, sort of a base layer, then we can paint this sort of like the darker colors, which we can then put lighter colors for the highlights over top of it. You can also see like the courage that he has, like when he's painting, like in this area. Look how thin some of that paint is. Like he's just like a couple of dashes and he's got it and he's moving on. Like he's not kind of doing a lot of fiddling. Right in here, I mean, you could, right here in the original, you could see it's very thin. So let's take this, keep on moving. Again, so there's some of the reason why I put that matte medium in there is twofold. One is that I preserve the warm yellow so that it's not all obscured, which some people may or may not like, but I like keeping it there. But also I can still see all my pencil lines through here. right here on the shoulder here. And let's get this in place. Okay, then let's just zoom out. So we can see where we're at this stage. Yeah, blue is a little bit intense. And so you can see why, you know, the value of putting that little bit more of a brown as opposed to the warm yellow that I did. And, you know, we could have done that. I was going to do that, but then decided to just keep things simple. So we'll see how dominant that is. If this color still remains, that blue, really, really dominant, then we could kind of push it back with a little bit of brown and kind of simulate. We kind of put that brown over top of this blue to kind of push it back to reduce some of the intensity of that color. So what I always think is great about acrylic painting is no matter what, you're never completely sunk. There's always a way to resolve any quote-unquote mistake. It might make for a few more unexpected steps and a little bit of cursing, but you can always make it work, right? Okay, so let's let this white dry. How about let's paint the vest here next. So that vest, interesting color. So we can use just our dark color to do this, but he's got also a little bit of brown in there too. So I think we might start with, I'm going to put some of this matte medium. Again, that's my darkest color. That was made with cool blue, warm red, and cool yellow, and we use that same color to do the underpainting there. I'm going to mix this together. This looks like I've made it gray, but I've just added matte medium into it, so it's getting more transparent. So when it dries, in a way, it's going to be kind of gray. It's just not going to be quite as dark. I'm also just going to steal a little bit of brown from in here and turn this into like a really dark brown. And because we're going to be going over top of it later with another color, with the darker color, I'm just going to go to a bigger brush. Up here in the shoulder. And then we'll do the same thing over here. Remember, this is still just our first pass on the foreground, so we're not expecting to mix all the quote-unquote right colors right off the bat. We're building up paint. It's sort of like this is like the pie crust or something, right? Everything else is going to sit over top of this, but this is, if you do a really nice anyone who's done any baking, if that pie crust works, doesn't matter what you put in there. You could have be chewing on a shoe, but if the crust is good, nothing like a good pie crust. Alright, so if we get the foundations of this painting established, then we're going to be very, very happy. Okay. Okay, let's do the face is dry enough now. Let's do the warm red in on her shawl up here. So in this instance, I'm just going to use the warm red. I don't think I'm going to add any. I'm not going to dilute it in any way, because this color is probably going to be a little bit transparent anyway. If this is too dark, you may even want to consider adding white into this red just a little bit to give it a bit more opacity. But the other thing to kind of keep in mind as I paint this, if I go over top of the blue with this warm red, basically they're going to mix optically and give the illusion that there's black there. So, which is not necessarily a problem, because in the original, he's done almost like a little bit of outlining, so that can kind of work. It's just something to keep in mind that if you paint red over blue or vice versa, when they overlap, they're going to create a much darker color. And sometimes, and I can't think of which painting, but we've done that a few times deliberately in order to make an outline. We just use the overlapping of colors to create a dark outline. But that's a little bit more of an advanced technique. I don't think we've really talked about that so much. And we can go into this a little bit, because that's going to go brown, and so that's just going to make that area even that much more dark. Okay. So there might have been a little bit of area we could have left there, but I'm just going to continue painting. And again, even though I'm sitting here obsessing about this little detail, this is stuff that we're going to come back and do a little bit of work around those edges anyway. So I'm not going to spend too much time on there. I think that's good. Now, maybe let's do just a little bit down here. We've got this. I guess let's do little bit. This would be just easier to do later. So we'll see. We'll see how... I might just paint purple right over there and then put that red in afterwards. Okay. So many people here watching and in the chat. That's awesome. And all these familiar faces and names. Lolly's just joined us. There's Paula and Pascal. There's Donna and Heidi. Holly's here. Kathy. Wow, I didn't have time to read all. Rachel's here. So many comments. You guys have been busy. Okay, I'm gonna keep on painting, otherwise I'll just sit here reading comments all night. So next, let's do the very purpley blue down at the bottom. All right, so this is a good example of the difference between that kind of purple before we added the cool yellow to it and the color we're about to make. Right, so we're going to take some of our magenta or cool red, and then we're going to take our warm blue, and it almost looks like we could just use that color. I just want to take a bit of this magenta and mix it in. Just a little bit more of a slightly purpley quality. Now, if I paint that right now, it's going to be really dark. If I paint this on top of my warm yellow, it's instantly just going to go like very, very dark brown. Right? In fact, let's just do that right here. If I paint right here, you can see that's just like, that's not really the color, especially if I go a little bit thinner. Let me see if... All right, you can see that's not really a super pleasant color. So what we want to do is we're going to add some white here. And we don't need to add too much of it. I'm just going to mix this in. And this is an instance where I'm probably not going to add my matte medium in here. I'm going to keep it a little bit. Otherwise, I'm going to allow a lot more of that yellow to come through, and I want to kind of keep it relatively sparse. Now, I'm also just going to be allow myself to allow some gaps between some of the colors, potentially. Like, you see that little bit of red there, and the white, or the yellow, red, and the purple. I'm just going to leave that little bit of yellow kind of popping through. Okay. I'm going to come here, and I'm just going to paint right over all of that. I'm going to paint right over all of this too. Okay, and let's come down over here. So because there's a little bit of white in here, and I haven't used any matte medium, I've obliterated a little bit of my pencil lines, which, you know, it can be a little frustrating, but it's pretty loose the way those pencil lines were painted anyway. So you can see they're kind of popping back in here. Okay. So at the moment, you know, they've lost a little bit of intensity. If we paint the same color over top of here again, which is what I might do without maybe a little bit less white, then I'll get a little bit more of an intense bluish color over there. But we'll save that for maybe in the next few steps. Paula says, thanks Michael for the class. This is my survival from the distractions. I hope your daughter is feeling better, and I see you've been talking about the war in Ukraine, and I think the more time you spend doing creative things like this, it gives us, you know, like a little bit of a respite from some of the things that are going on in the world or in our own personal lives, and that can be, you know, there's nothing wrong with taking care of our own mental health, even when other people around us might also be struggling, right? Because if we're not healthy, it's really hard to take care of our family and friends, right? So I think whatever we can do to take care of ourselves, that helps take care of our community, right? And our country and our fellow human beings, our brothers and sisters, right? And there's Pao Balthazar. Hi, Pao. And Lolly says, 100% Paula, Michael's classes are my favorite distraction. I appreciate that. Okay, so I'm just thinking about what we want to do on this next pass here on the painting. We could do a little bit more on the face now, I suppose. Maybe we should do, well, I was going to do the hair, but, you know, I probably want to save the hair until I get a little bit more on the face, because I want to paint the hair over top of the skin, right? I don't want the skin to look like it's over top of the hair, right? Or, you know, like that line, that would look kind of weird, right? It would look like I've got some kind of face mask pulled. So you always, I recommend you think of painting whatever's closest to us or on top of things, literally on top of things, right? That way we create these sort of natural layering. There are artists like Tom Thompson, Group of 7 artists, and I think it was Donna talking about that, who've done things where they painted the sky through the tree and literally painted the sky color on top of the tree, and it gives things like a very odd, uncanny quality, which I think he liked. I think he thought that there's probably a little part of him while he's painting it just laughing to himself like, whoa, that is kind of strange. It's probably not what I'm supposed to do here, but I kind of like it. I gotta say, I kind of like it. And I think if you have that experience while you're painting and you're doing things wrong, if you like it, then what's so wrong about it, right? Okay. Let's do a little bit more on the face. I think let's do a highlight. Let's do we'll do a darker shade on the face, and then we're gonna do a highlight, and then we'll leave the face. We'll come back and maybe do something else. So let's go back to our flesh tones that we made earlier, right? So this is the color that we applied over top of the warm yellow. So let's make this a little bit darker now. So we'll take this color, let's look side by side, and we're going to go for something maybe a little bit. It's like before we had this here, let's go for a darker value like we have here on the nose. So to get that little bit of a darker color, again, let's take a bit more of this. That was the skin tone we had. Let's add a little bit more. Ooh, I was gonna say a little bit more blue. That's a lot more blue. Not bad, but that's pretty. That's intense. You know what? I think I might go for it. And you know what? Maybe even before I do this, let's paint some of that eye. In fact, I'm going to take some of that gray from before, from her clothes. I'm going to add some white to it. Because you rarely ever want to paint an eye pure white. Otherwise, it's going to look kind of weird. So when I'm painting like an eye like this, what I generally do is actually paint it. You know, the eye, the pupil and the iris are going to come back down over top of that, but I'm painting a little bit further into those things. That just gives me more flexibility. And to be able to cover that up later. So now it kind of looks like her eyes are looking a little bit upwards as opposed to directly towards us. Alright. And we may even want to darken a little bit of that later on. We'll see. Okay. So let's I was saying maybe I should blow dry it, but let's just take this darker color that we mixed and we'll start thinking of like the shadow shapes on her face, the darker areas. I did a little on her neck there. It wasn't on camera, but okay. So I keep wanting to put my brush in my teacup. I gotta move that away before I'm courting disaster. So we're probably gonna go a step darker than that eventually, but that's good enough for this stage. Let's go in the opposite. Actually, let's take this and let's just add a little bit to it. So it's still going to be a little bit, not quite as dark. So all I did is I just because to make that darker color, I just put a little bit more blue into this, right? So now I've basically remixed the color, but it's still a little bit lighter, or a little bit darker than, and less peachy than the previous color that we had here. So I'm going to use this to kind of go in and just lightly lighten up. That looks a little bit, because I've got some white in there. So it's actually almost a little bit more gray, a little more opaque now that I paint this here. So I'm actually going to go into put some of that in my darker area real quick. Okay, so let's come back to this. Even a little bit more white. A little bit more warmth in there too, just a little bit. Okay. So basically, see, I just sort of painted everything. Now I've got sort of I got darker areas and I got lighter areas. Just starting to build some of these shapes up. And it does look a little bit weird, you know, without the hair and like some of the darker lines around the face. I totally get that. Like, I think for, especially if you're a new beginner painter, sometimes you get to, you're like, that looks really weird. It looks like a ghost or someone, like, it's because we don't have some of the darker areas that really define the face painted on here. And so sometimes, you know, it's a little bit of a revelation when we get to the end, and then we put some of those things on top. Let's do one more little bit here on the face. I think that would help people a little bit. So I'm going to take a little bit more white. I'm going to take this color, and this one's going to be maybe one of our brightest highlights here. One of the things that we can use is glazing medium. I'm trying to do today's painting without using any glazing medium because it's a little bit more. I think it's a great tool. We've used that when let's say we paint the Mona Lisa and a lot of other portraits because we can get really like soft transitions With a painting like this, we can do that as well. But, you know, I don't... The way that he's painted this painting, I think it allows us to have a little bit more stronger contrast between some of these values. So we're now going to paint some of these areas real quick, the highlights. So I'm just kind of brushing pretty softly. If you can get in there kind of quick, you can just use your finger to smudge a little bit. Okay. Should we do some rouge on her cheeks? Yeah, maybe while we've got this color here, let's take a bit of warm red. This is a pretty pinky kind of color, right? And we may even want to use a bit more of this a little bit later on, but not quite maybe as pink as it could be. So you can see I'm doing cheek, chin, and then a little bit here on her nose. Even a little bit under her nose. A bit underneath those eyes. And then I'm going to take even more of this red. Actually, I'm just going to go with a smaller brush now. I don't mind having, I kind of want a little bit of this skin tone on these, on the lips, otherwise this red is just, I don't want to put the same red that's here right on her lips. pretty good. Okay. So I think we'll probably do a little bit more to give a little bit more life into her face later on. But for this point, she's starting to come into focus there. So I think it's time for just for a little bit of tea here. So I think we can just now just evaluate this here. In fact, maybe before we do that, let's okay, so we've done the background pass, we've done our first pass on the foreground. Let's just talk about the background. Do we want to do anything more to the background now that we started to kind of fill the majority of the painting up with other color, because it's going to influence how we think about our background. So let's look at this side by side. Now this is definitely much brighter, right? Like this color is what we see here, but it's definitely darker in behind. Now, do we want to do anything? Do we need to do anything? I don't, you know, that is really hard to say. I think I'm just going to leave it. I think trying to make it a little bit darker it might, I mean, I could do it. We could simulate that effect. I just think you kind of just think to yourself, well, how important is that? Does it really need it, or is that just sort of a very minor detail? I'd say that most people are not really going to spend too much time thinking about the background. The only thing is if it's just really, really overwhelming the foreground, and I think we would still want to see even more detail in, like, say, the hair and the outlining of the face to make a decision. I think I'm going to like it like this, with a little bit of a brighter, punchier background. So that means that because we're pretty, at least I'm pretty satisfied with my background, even though it's not exactly the same, I'm going to move on to the foreground. And I think we're just going to resolve the foreground and then we'll be done. So, what should be the next step here? Well, I'm feeling pretty good about, let's say, even the face. I think we could start... You know, what I might do, actually, I might do the purple again and just get that a little bit more, just make that pop just a bit more before I move on, so that can kind of dry a little bit. So remember, we made this purple using our warm blue and cool red, and I added a bit of white to it. I'm going to add a bit of white again. I could have added even more white. I think I'm just going to use... Let's see these side by side. Kind of like that. Again, I'm going to try, just like he did, to kind of maybe keep things a little bit transparent in places. So I'm not going to deliberately cover everything. Leaving a little bit of patchiness. I mean, it's hard. It's like, oh, I want to paint over every bit. Ugh. It's like, I'm telling you, we've done a number of paintings like that where just leaving bits, quote unquote, unfinished or unpainted takes like all of your humanly abilities to let that just stay like that. Maybe let's go then to the shirt. So I think my plan will be, let's do the shirt, then we'll do the vest. Well, no, then we'll do the, I don't know, we'll see. We'll do one thing at a time, Michael. I'm trying to think 10 steps ahead. Okay. So looking at the way that he approached this, I think what I'm going to do the darker values next. And then, so we'll take the, remember, let's get a medium-sized brush here. This was the white, which I painted down here and also used the same for her eyes. I'm going to take, this was our brown, that was for the vest. Let's take a bit more of this. We'll mix this to the side because that's got a bit of brown in it. And we don't want to go too dark. We want kind of a middle gray tone here. I think that's pretty good. To keep it a little bit fluid, I'm going to add just a bit of matte medium. This is going to give it a little bit more transparency too. Next. So you could see that he applied this dark gray and then the lighter color on top of it afterwards. Including here, it looks like he painted this and then he painted kind of over top of it. Okay, let's zoom back out a little bit there. And now I'm just going to clean that brush off just briefly. And we've got this previous white that we had before. I'm going to take a little bit of that gray, not much of it, just mix this in there. This isn't a pure white. You can see there was even some brown and some blue in there. I don't mind If I want pure white, I'll do that maybe at towards the very, very, very end. Because I don't think there's any pure white in this painting at all. Like, you can, as you look at that, that starts to look pretty blue, right? Like, potentially we might want to do another layer after this of this white. We'll see. Remember I said, like, we're gonna go, he painted this and then he went kind of over top of it. Just kind of hide that a little bit. And this is kind of a little bit more blue in there, so maybe we'll reserve that for a second. I'm not too concerned if I get other colors layering over top. The one thing, I mean, these are gonna, this is a black that we're gonna put back over top of here, so not a big deal, but sometimes, especially if you're glazing with over top of a white, that white will kind of really show through. It's a kind of weird little anomaly. And now that as I'm painting this, I see he's getting more and more cool blue as he's moving across here, but let's put a little bit more of this. Then we'll add some cool blue to the same color, and we'll build that up just a bit more. It's maybe even. I'll put a bit of that there. And I just use my finger just to kind of smudge and that kind of stuff. Okay. So this is our, this is what we use for the background. So I'm just take a bit of that. I don't think we're going to need too much of it to give it that effect. Now I kind of like that. Do I feel like it needs to be more blue? It does appear that he went even further than I've done. Let's do just a little bit more. Let's take this a little bit further. A little bit more of that blue. You know, the more and more I use, I'm like, wow, there's more. I see more and more of one color there. But before I get carried away, let's just think that's okay. Maybe just a bit more here. And I think I might even go back in there with some white. Maybe a bit more on this shoulder a little bit later. Okay. How about... let's do the vest. Let's go right into the vest. So that vest that we had, remember this was our black that we had? And then we took some of this brown as well. We mix this in here. So I'm gonna kind of paint with it. So there was some matte medium here that I had originally. I don't mind that getting in here. So the more matte medium you have, just the thinner the paint is going to be, and then the slower you can paint. You could do, if you're a little bit scared of going black, oh, it's too intense, then put a little bit of matte medium in there and just do a little bit, and then you're like, okay, let's do a little bit more. Oh, I think I could use a little. Let's do a little bit more. That way you can take your time. That way, because if you're just afraid of just making that big, bold brushstroke, there's nothing wrong with taking a little bit, taking it slow until you feel like you're happy, right? And that's the great thing of using matte medium or glazing fluid. Any kind of medium that thins the paint, makes it a little bit more transparent, just gives you a little bit more. It's just less intense of and dominant of a brush stroke, so you can hedge your bet just a little bit, right? So, but I think I don't have that much matte medium on here, so I'm expecting this next brush stroke to be much darker. So I'm going to go to those places where it's going to be much darker, and I can just paint that in, and we're like, yeah, that's going to be okay. I think I'm pretty happy here. This outline. Top. Right, so let's even get, looks like some kind of fold, just like we were doing down here. It's almost like I'm looking for the folds in the vest. Let's go over here. Much darker. Now I see there's almost a little bit of like turquoise or something in here. So to kind of get a little bit of that, let's take a little bit of this cool blue, mix that into our color just a little bit. So maybe that might be, well, actually I don't mind that. Never one to be to reject a little bit of extra color in a painting. Anywhere else that color can go. Let's look, how about a little bit of gray on there? Okay. How about we go the opposite direction? Let's make a bit of a brown. Let's take some let's take a bit of warm red and warm yellow. Mix this in here. I kind of went pretty big. So let's just take more of our dark color. And where can I do this? Maybe we'll paint, well, I was going to say maybe let's paint directly with, well, one thing that artists often do is mix, they don't even really mix colors, take some little, in fact, let's do a bit of that. Instead of me explaining it, let's take, I'm just going to take a bit of both my brown and my black color, and then I can paint directly with those colors on here. So we get maybe a less even application of paint, where the paint is actually mixing directly onto the canvas. So you sort of use your painting like a palette. That can be kind of scary for some people to do, because you don't really know exactly what you're going to get, because you're mixing directly onto the surface. Area where it's just really brown. So we'll see. We'll see. And also there's some reflections on there that might be a little deceiving. I don't mind anything I've just been doing. I think that's kind of cool. Now, actually, I'm going to take this pretty much the same brown I just painted, and let's use that for the first little bit of her hair. So maybe let's zoom in. And I'm going to go to a smaller brush. I thought I bought some smaller square brushes the other day, didn't I? Where do I hide these things on myself? Huh. Well, we'll find out later on, of course. So I'm just going to go to an even smaller brush. And I think you'll see as I paint this that her face transforms entirely without me painting her face. Just her hair, and having her hair starting to kind of appear will make her face kind of come into focus, which is one of the wild things of portraiture. I forgot to paint her ear there. So it's kind of cool what he's doing here is it's hard to tell where the hair ends and where the shadows on the veil, or on the sort of her shawl, kind of begin and end. I like that kind of thing. That's pretty subtle. I'm also going to take this same brown and I'm going to go into her eyebrow now. So we want to look at the shape of that eyebrow. So kind of let it, I might have even gone a bit far. We kind of want to keep that pretty short, usually when we're painting a woman's eyebrow, not to make it get too big. And I'm also going to take this brown, I'm going to do the top eyelid with it. Maybe, you know, remember this blue that I used for. I'm gonna take the same. Actually, I think I want it to be. Well, actually, not bad. I was gonna take. So let's take this cool blue. I might just mix it again a little bit off to the side here. So that's my cool blue that I had actually mixed with, made it a little bit darker, and it's a slightly teal, which is got a little bit of yellow in it, but it's also got a bit of gray. And let's just paint that. In fact, I'm going to take a bit of that, make it a little bit lighter. That brown. He's also just kind of put a bit of that in her eyebrow, doesn't he? Interesting choice. He's also taken a bit of it, put a bit in her hair too. That's interesting. So we're going to do more subtle effects there on the face here shortly, but that's a pretty good little beginning on that area here. see you guys, or Paul is talking, or you guys are just talking about television and war and news. This is a great book. I want to do a kind of a series talking about some books that I've been reading lately that I really enjoy. This is I found this really, really interesting. Just about it's called Hate Incorporated by Matt Taibbi. Or Taibbi, Matt Taibbi? Taibbi? I can't remember exactly how you pronounce it. I've seen a couple interviews with him, but what's just really interesting, just how the news on both sides manipulates us. And it's about trying to turn the news into a kind of a drug that we get addicted to. We're constantly refreshing browsers of various different news organizations. It doesn't matter whatever spectrum, where you fall on that spectrum, but all news organizations want you to be looking, and kind of, it's sort of like a movie that, you know, or a television show that ends on a cliffhanger. Tune in tomorrow to find out what's happened to our hero. And it's the same thing, like, and if you really think of the news like that, you realize, like, oh, everything is organized to keep me in this perpetual state of anxiety, of like, oh, I gotta wait, what has happened? Oh, I gotta tune in tomorrow to find out if the world's still there, right? And not that the news isn't important. We've had this discussion here before. I wanted to be a journalist, and I made a decision to become an artist. I was trying to decide between journalism and art, and obviously I went into art instead. So I have a great, and I spent years doing practicums at the CBC radio here, well, in Calgary, where I went to high school. Every day after school, I would go and work on the radio, and I was like 17 years old and was, you know, a junior journalist and all this, and I got scholarships to go to all these different universities, you know, Ryerson and Western, and where are a couple other, are all out east. So I think journalists are some of the most important people in our society. I'm not anti-news. I'm not into like everything's fake news, and journalists do a great service, but the news organizations try to get us addicted to the news, and that creates a constant level of anxiety. So my recommendation is try to detox a little bit from watching too much news, because you'll notice the news doesn't really change that much. There's not really a lot of big news that ever really occurs. So, and I'm talking about a person of Ukrainian descent, and there's a war in my ancestral homeland right now, and still I'm trying as much as possible to not watch the news, because it's not helping me, right? I'd much rather give money to organizations that are on the ground helping. But me watching more and more news of more and more people dying, it's not going to make me feel any better. It just makes me feel worse. Anyway, I'll just hop off my soapbox here and continue painting. Let's work on her shawl next. I think that's kind of a big missing ingredient here. So, we painted that with a warm red. So I think we're going to take some, maybe we just use our brown or dark color again. And we're going to mix that into the red. And I got a little bit of, you know, some cool blue in there. I don't mind if that gets on my brush. Let's take a medium level darkness. And I'm even going to add just a little bit of matte medium to thin it out a little bit. Okay. Let's go to a smaller brush now. Make sure we're still in focus. And just make sure I'm not going to smudge all over this. Now we can kind of come around and use your finger to kind of blend it out. That's the benefit of using like a medium inside your paint. Just gives you that little bit of flexibility. Okay. I'm going to soften those edges with my finger out. Not sure how well that looks on camera. I'm going to do another layer of that shortly. We'll just let this dry. That's the great thing about using a matte medium again. It's we can do a nice slow build up until we get to where we want to be. Just soften that edge down. And then as we come around to the other side here, this is where everything starts to kind of blend in together because it's all kind of on the darker side. The light is kind of coming from the left. Just take this and paint right on her neck there and fill that area in. Okay. So that's pretty good for that step. Do we want to do any more with this? Oh, you know what? There's a little bit. I think you took the same color. Mine's a little bit bolder than what he did, but that's okay. Okay, so I think I'm going to blow dry that. You know, maybe, you know what drives me nuts is I want to do her ear, and that needs to be kind of like a pink. Just before I move on here. So that ear, I should have done this earlier, but I missed it. So let's just take this pink. And can we use this? Maybe I'm just going to put a bit of matte medium on there. Make it a little bit thinner. Okay. Let's see if we just take a bit more red in there. I went a little far. That's okay. So we can always fix anything like that. I'm not sure how it looks. Yeah, it looks a little bit intense on camera. So no big deal, because I also want to do a little more on that other ear. So how about let's try to do a bit of that right now. Let's take some of that red. Let's mix it into our flesh tone here. Soften that up. Okay, I'm going to blow dry a bunch of stuff here so that I can continue working. Donna says it's hailing pretty bad in North Vancouver. Wow. I did not, I mean, my studio, all the windows are closed so I can control the lighting in here. I'm in Vancouver itself, and North Vancouver is on the other side of a bay inlet, so I wouldn't be able to see it from our house anyway, but usually if something's happened up there, it'll move on down this way. So we'll see. I can hear my daughter playing outside, so, which doesn't really tell you anything because she loves playing in the rain and the snow, and so it could very well be apocalyptic weather out there, and she'd be very, very happy. Okay, I said this painting would take about 2.5 hours, and we're at about the 2.5 hour mark, although I spent about half hour talking, so that should mean I'm about half hour left. How much, what do we want to do to get complete here? So I want to do a little bit more highlights and a little bit more shadows in the face for sure. I could darken a little bit of the fabric. There's little details there. How about let's do some of the details on her shelf maybe now. That's probably good. Okay, so that green. This green is a bit of a cool green. It's pretty bright green. So let's try to get that. Let's do so cool blue and cool yellow gives us this real poppin' green. Let's try it before I make any decisions, because I might want to add a little bit more blue in here, into it. It is a little bit bright, so let's take just a little bit of warm blue and mix this into this bright green. There we go. Just knocks it back a little bit. Now up there, because I'm painting on that red, I'm going to add a little bit of white in here. Probably just put a bit too much now. Oh well, we can paint green back over top of these. Bit of that over there, and maybe there's a bit of this in the shadows. Okay. On the same token, let's take some of this warm yellow. Maybe again take a bit of white. You notice I still have my green on my brush. Not doesn't bother me that it's got a little bit of that green. I didn't even wash it. That's pretty bright. Oh. So I'll just go back and get this green back on my brush. Okay. Now I want a bit of pink. I could have used the same pink when I painted her ear for this, so let's... more red. This is a little bit too transparent, so. bit more of a purple, isn't it? Okay. Let me just zoom out and just see how we're faring. Okay. So now I'm going to darken even more in the hair and up here. I could actually do a little bit of glaze. The easiest thing possible would be to glaze with a dark color, and I could really quickly bang that out. In fact, let's do, do I want to do glazing? I haven't done, have we used glazing fluid in the beginners episodes yet? Let's use some matte medium for that. So it's basically the same. It doesn't quite have the same level of flexibility, but I've got my matte medium here, clear paint. And I'll take my black, and let's just blend my matte medium into that. So it's going to make this paint more transparent. And now I can use this to darken some things. So let's look at this here. So it's going to go on a little bit kind of grayish, and as it dries, it's going to go more dark. Let's over here. Now we can just kind of very selectively darken certain areas, regardless of their color. I would advise not doing this directly onto the face with this color. You might not get the results you want. But elsewhere, I think we can use it pretty effectively. Let's go back up. Actually, I should blow dry all that and let that dry. That way I can do a second coat. kind of like, I don't know, I think I've got a lot of what I want in these. Anything else need to get much darker? I don't know. Okay, so before I finish off with the face, let's do a few details in her clothing here. So let's take this gray. It's kind of seizing up a little bit. It's been on the palette for a while, drying. So it's a little brighter than I want, but that's okay. So if it is a little bit brighter, let's just make it a little bit darker. Much darker. I don't know if we want it to be that dark, but we can have a few different versions. What's kind of interesting, you know, like as I said, I used to wear, I still have somewhere, probably my parents' house, my old Hutsulka dance clothes, and the patterning is famously detailed and intricate, whereas what we see here is a very simplified pattern, right? And which I think is amazing, that how he like the decisions that he's made to simplify this. I'm actually just going to continue this down here. That looks like a face with a squiggly mouth there, doesn't it? So, well, sometimes when you see those things in your painting, you can keep them or you can get rid of them. Oops. Let's do a little bit of that red here. Again, I want a little bit of white on there so it shows up against a dark background. Oops, that's a bit much. We'll let that dry, and then we can paint with it after. Paint some just regular red over top of it. And even though he didn't do this, I'm going to try to keep things a little bit symmetrical by putting those little dots on those other sides. Maybe even extend this. Again, I always say, like, doesn't matter what the original looks like. If you're looking at your own painting and you feel like it's a little bit strange, sometimes it's okay for you to make a change, right? So I'm just going to blow dry that. Okay, now I'm just going to take some just pure red and paint over top of these areas where I had a little bit of white. And that's just going to make that color pop a little bit more. Probably should have put a bit more white in there, but it is what it is. I'm just going to quickly blow dry that. Okay, so we are moving right along. Now we're going to do our finishing touches. Really, at this point, as far as I'm concerned, the only thing I really want to do is just finish up on the face. A little bit of shadow, a little bit more highlights, finish her hair, fix that ear a little bit underneath her chin, and we'll be done. So, we're counting down to the end on this one. The other thing I'll say just right off the bat is now that you can see, now that the face has started to kind of come into focus, the background feels totally fine. Like, remember, I was like, oh, do I want to make the background darker? I mean, I do really like the way that his turned out. I mean, obviously I chose it for this to paint it, but I also am pretty happy with this blue as it is. It actually makes it look a little bit brighter, right? If anything, the difference between his brown that we see a lot more of down there, or that his brown Imprimatura, whereas I used a warm yellow, his kind of almost looks like it could be on the inside, like this painting could have been done on the inside of a house, like this might be wallpaper, right? And you know, pretty bright kitchen or something, somebody sitting at a kitchen table, and whereas mine now looks much more like somebody might be sitting literally outside in front of a big bright blue sky. So just those little changes can really affect the way that we the interpretation we might get from a particular painting. So I think we want to go darker. I want to go a little bit darker now on the face, and then we're going to go a little bit lighter, and then we'll be pretty close to being done. That brush starting to fray. It's approaching its end life. So let's do the brown of her hair. It might be worth just making a new brown, because we can use that same brown for skin tones. So let's take our warm red, a lot more warm yellow, mix that together, and we've got a yellow orange. Okay, nice bright orange. Let's now take some warm blue. I'm like, what is this? Okay, so right now, actually, let's mix a little bit of a skin tone. And we'll put this to the side. We'll let that sit there on its own. Let's do this again. We'll take a little bit more red and a little bit more blue. And now we're going to get a dark brown. So that we can add a little bit of white to, and we can use that for skin tones. This is now for our hair, and we can just keep on adding more and more blue to it to make it darker. That's probably good enough. We could, if we want to make it even darker, we can take our black. This looks like there's not much left. Let's mix that black a little bit more. So we're going to take, you notice I didn't even bother cleaning my brush. No need to, right? Because we're just making a dark color, and more colors in there are gonna help. Unless there's white in there. We don't want white. So we just got our warm red, cool blue, and then we're going to take some cool yellow. Now I got a perfect black. And if we want, we can just take this. How about let's take a bit of this color and we'll just put it to the side. And now we've got a light brown. We can add some white in there for a skin tone. We've got a darker brown and then a much darker brown. And then I can just sort of dip my brush into whichever one. Now those colors, there's not a lot of paint there, so it's not like they're going to last all evening. But I want to be done in the next 20 minutes or so, so that's more than enough time. So. Let's start with her hair and just sort of bring that to some resolution. I'm going to take that darker color that I also had and maybe come in just a little bit. This is my darker brown. Okay. Maybe actually I'll take that dark brown, very, very dark brown, and let's just do a little bit on the top of this eyelid and then her pupil. I'll probably darken that pupil again later, but so I'm happy with that. Let's, I need some more white. Okay, so let's take this white and mix this into our skin tone. What I'm looking for is a darker brown. Let's see. Or not dark brown, but just a... Yeah, there we go. I think I actually want to be a little bit darker than that. So let's just take a bit more of that brown. Just going to do kind of a bit of outlining of the nose. A little intense. Let's add just a little bit more white in there. So this is a little bit easier if we use some glazing fluid. I'm trying my best to avoid that just because it's maybe not everyone painting has access to that material yet. So this is a it's kind of bouncing between a little bit of adding a little bit more white in here just to lighten it up a little bit. Just gonna wipe that away. Well, that's okay. So I'm gonna put a little bit of matte medium here because things are just getting a little bit too thick and opaque in the matte medium. I'm just going to make things a little bit thinner, give me a little bit more flexibility. So I wiped, as I was wiping that paint away, I wiped a little much. So we'll just let that dry and then we'll get that in a moment. I'm just going to get a bit of this underneath the other side of the chin on her neck here. And even up onto her cheek a bit there. Get just a bit more red into that color. Oh. Let's get just a bit more white in there. It was a little bit too dark. the other way and just get a bit darker. Okay. Okay, let's, her lips now. Let's take this red. I'm going to take a bit of matte medium to thin this red out. So I want to, like, I'm diluting it, but I'm not adding any other colors into it. Just widening her mouth out a little bit. There were a little bit puckered lips before, which made her look like she was a little bit disappointed or something. I want to make sure there's the top of the lip there still has some light on it, because that's where the light's going to hit it. See how her expression changes ever so slightly just by widening her mouth out a bit. And just think about, like, when we do that ourselves, like if your mouth is like that versus the more you sort of smile, the wider your mouth is going to get, right? So it's unless you're kissing, otherwise it's, you know, even if it's relaxed, your mouth is going to be kind of not as wide. Then there's a certain point where the wider it gets, the more alarmed your face will sort of look. Okay. I don't know if I need to do much more. The only thing I'm just starting to look at is the width of her neck here. I just want to make sure that I think I need to bring this in with a little bit more dark. Her head is looking maybe a little bit wide. Maybe let's just take a look here. Yeah, let's trim that down. So I'll take maybe a little bit more of my darkest color. Ah. That helps. Let's do a little bit of this black on the other side here. Okay, I mean, if I was using some glazing fluid, I think I could do a little bit more refinements in here. But I think for, this is one of our beginner paintings, and I'm feeling like I've already gone a little bit further than most beginners might be able to. There's probably going to be like, yeah, are you kidding me? This is not much of a beginner painting. So. And we can get much more complex than this if you've been watching for a while. People are like, yeah, I can for sure. And now, even as I look at this, like that red even could have gone a bit magenta too, but these are all pigments that he would not have had access to at the time, so. I don't know, I don't know, I could probably walk away here. Maybe I'm just gonna bring her hair in a little bit closer. Forehead just seemed really big. Like what he's done masterfully is like a kind of a level of softness everywhere that's very kind of impressionist, also very much like Monet. And which is very difficult to do with acrylic paint, right? So just being mindful of that. I don't know, maybe, okay, down here, one last thing, finishing touches. You just want to, this little thing, I just don't want that to look too much like a, do I need to do, maybe it's fine. Maybe, am I the only one who sees like a Space Invader face or something there? Oh, I was gonna do a bit more highlight on her forehead. can always get rid of it if we don't like it. If we're quick on the mark, we can wipe it away. There's a pretty strong contrast on her nose here. Not that big of a deal. Okay, I want to blow dry that real quick. Okay, I think I gotta just say that's, I mean, because we could keep on pumping more and more highlights in here, but I think I'm happy enough. I can walk away. which is where I want to be. It's not about perfection, it's about satisfaction, right? It's like when you make dinner, Thanksgiving dinner, it doesn't have to be perfect for people to eat it, right? Because if it had to be perfect, probably none of us would have ever had a Thanksgiving dinner or a Christmas dinner or whatever. Because when is it ever perfect, right? When is anything ever perfect? I like that. I like that a lot. So, let's okay, so it's time for our side-by-side comparison just to see how they turned out. I'm pretty happy. It's definitely a little bit different, but that's okay. Maybe just before we do that, just like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. There is the other painting in the Dropbox folder, also by the same artist that I want to do over the next few days here. So hit the notification bell so you know when that episode happens. And if you found any of this interesting, entertaining, laughable, educational, consider leaving a donation for as little as $1 through PayPal. You can use the super chat function here in YouTube. If you see a little $ underneath where you can enter a comment, that's how you can do that. There's also the Facebook group, which you can contact me directly through there, which many people do. So let's take a look at these two paintings side by side. Let's zoom in a bit. And, you know, probably, again, the background, we've talked a lot about the difference in the decisions I made to do it a little bit differently. If we had used a brown, we would have got, as opposed to my warm yellow, we would have got the exact same results. So mine maybe looks like it's a little bit more outside than maybe inside, which, hey, we're getting closer to summer. That's kind of a good thing, right? Overall, like, his whole process is a lot more kind of very loose brush. So, and he's painting in oil paint, so he's able to get more mixing colors. Like, so for instance, like these, so he's got the little bit of blurred edges between the figure and the background, whereas everything in my painting is a lot more distinct, right? And that's just a feature of oil paint that is really hard to capture with acrylic. So yes, there is that little bit of a difference. So mine just feels a little bit more crisp, and that's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing. So we just start by looking at these faces. Mine looks a little bit more orangey red than his, and I think that's probably to do with my warm yellow that is underneath here. And so that warm yellow is coming through my warm red and giving it a little bit more of an orangey color, as opposed to his, where he's painting that warm red over top of the rusty brown Imprimatura. So that's just going to create a little bit more of a muted red. Now I think once I put these paintings to the side, or I put the, you know, once I stop comparing them, I'll be very, very, very happy with the red that I have. It's just comparing them, you can see there's a little bit of a difference. Let's just maybe continue. Let's maybe go to the bottom right here. Pretty similar. You know, again, I made a few changes just to make, because I have a little bit more space around the edges to work with. So this could have been a little bit more muted, that gray. The blazer looks very brown here, but it's also, I got a little bit more light. I think when I'm in a darker condition, this is going to look almost exactly like the original. He had also a lot more blue in his white there than I see. All of that I feel pretty good about. So, not too bad for, what, 3 hours of work here. Okay, everybody. Thank you once again for painting along with me, for celebrating a little bit of Ukrainian culture, learning a little bit about Ukraine and my cultural background. I think the more that people become aware of the great Ukrainian artists of the past, maybe people might question some of the reasons for this whole conflict happening in the first place, where some people believe that Ukraine doesn't actually exist. There's no such thing as Ukrainian. It's just something someone made up 100 years ago. As Ukrainian myself, that seems absolutely ridiculous, but that's why this war is taking place. So, war is just insane to begin with. So, even trying to understand why people go to war just seems like ludicrous. So, thank you, everyone. We're going to see you on Thursday, because on Thursday we are going to be painting another very famous image that is very topical at this exact moment. We're going to be looking at the painting that was created, that is on the world's most popular stamp right now. It's a stamp that was issued by the Ukrainian government. We'll talk all about that on Thursday. It's the fastest grossing, most expensive new stamp in recent history. So we'll talk all about that in just a few days. So everybody, enjoy the next couple of days. I hope the hail has stopped if you're in North Vancouver, that the snow has stopped if you're in Alberta, and if you're in somewhere really, really warm right now, well, tough. I mean, everyone feels very, very sorry for you. Okay, everybody, enjoy the rest of your evening, and we will talk to you soon. Good night, everyone.